Hi, my name is Tyrik McKeiver, and I'm one of the co-directors of the TruDiversity initiative at the Truman National Security Project. As part of our Black History Month spotlight, I'm joined by Captain Gail Harris, who retired after 28 years of service as the highest-ranking African American female in the U.S. Navy. I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to learn more about her remarkable impact on the U.S. military, intelligence community, and across the national security apparatus. Captain Harris, thanks for taking the time to join us today. You have an incredible story to share, so why don't we just jump right into it so that our listeners can learn from your journey? So, the first question I have, how did your family and where you grew up impact you, your identity, and your life?
The song lyric, The Wind Beneath My Wings, basically describes my parents. They were very supportive. When I was 5 years, I should say I grew up in Newark, New Jersey and spent summers in Alabama. When I was a teenager, my dad was able to move the family out of the central ward of Newark and into suburbia. But when I was 5 years old, I was watching a movie with my father called A Wing and a Prayer, starring Don Amici. It was about the aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor and right before the Battle of Midway, the battle that changed the tide for us in the Pacific. And Don Amici at one point was giving an intelligence brief to the pilots. I didn't know what that was, but he was telling the pilots where the Japanese ships were that they needed to destroy. So I turned to my father, and like I said, I was 5. I said, Daddy, when I grow up, that's what I'm going to do. And my dad had been in the Army in the aftermath of World War I when it was still segregated. So he could have burst my bubble right then and there by telling me that there were only a handful of Black male officers in the Navy, let
Yeah.
alone female. And instead, he looked at me and said, This is America. You can be whatever you want to be when you grow up. And a little less than 20 years later, I became the first woman in history to do that job. And I was assigned to a combat squadron. So I became the first woman in the Navy in 200 years to be uh, assigned to a combat squadron. So that is your dreams. If you have children, and they look at you when they're 4 or 5 and say, This is what I'm going to do, Daddy.
Listen
Don't,
to him.
don't discount
Yeah,
it.
yeah. No, so let's talk about the Ring and a Prayer film and representation. So obviously, I grew up watching black and white films and television shows with my grandmother, and I have an affinity for them. But can you talk to me a little bit more about seeing, that scene, that intelligence briefing with only, I think, I would assume, white males on screen and what that meant to you as a little black girl growing up in New Jersey, and that what that meant, and then how you kind of pivoted into the world of the military and being in a leadership role in your capacity as captain.
Well, I think, the beauty of children is, at 5, unless you have very unusual circumstances, you don't see color.
Yeah,
So when I was watching that, I didn't notice that it was all white males and that there were no women, so
yeah,
I just saw the human experience, and there was some inner knowing in me. And I firmly believe that each of us has a destiny, and you can either choose to follow your dreams. And by that, I don't mean like a casual dream, like, oh yeah, I'd like to have a date with that guy from Bridgerton. I don't mean anything like that. I mean, hey, folks know I know all you want from me is granny advice. But I mean a deep seated dream, like you want to be a doctor, you see a family member when you're a small child that's sick. And the thing that I can say, one of the great, everybody talks about the disadvantages of getting older, but what I've learned is one of the most powerful things about getting older is perspective, and you're able to see that your life choices, uh, like things maybe that happened to you that seem to be bad,
Mhm.
prepared you for something further down the line. So it wasn't, in the overall experience, it was good. So when I look, and then the other thing that I've noticed that there are guideposts that, and I don't mean to sound too woo-woo, but one of the things, my parents were both born in Alabama. My
Okay.
dad was born in Enterprise, Alabama. And although they didn't, in the movie, they didn't give you the name of the aircraft carrier, everybody knew it was the USS Enterprise because that was the most famous aircraft carrier in World War II. My
Yeah.
mother was the youngest of 12 children. She was born in Andalusia, Alabama, but everybody else in her family was born in Midway,
Oh,
Alabama.
interesting. Okay. Okay.
And when you retire from the military, they give you a flag that has been flown by a ship at sea. And the flag they gave me, and they didn't know my origin story, was flown by the USS Enterprise aircraft carrier.
No way.
Yes.
That's incredible. Okay. Okay.
And there's a couple of other things that I could go on, but for the sake of time, like I said, as I'm older and I look at all these, I go, oh my goodness, that was my pattern. So I was fortunate in that my parents, my dad, as I went through my career, helped me deal with organizational politics and how to the skill set you needed to achieve to do a good job in the workplace, things they don't teach you in school and they should. We're
Yeah.
talking about the basics. If you wake up sick and you're not going to work, pick up the phone and call and say, I'm not coming into work today, I'm sick. Just don't not show up. Things like that. How do you deal with somebody who's stabbing you in the back trying to get ahead? And at first, I thought my father's contributions to my life were in that area were greater. But as I got older, I realized that my mother's advice to me, which is developing a spiritual support system, was
Okay.
equally valued and at times perhaps more so. And when I give talks, I tell people, find a philosophy of life that you can put things in perspective. And no one should tell you what that should be. I mean, I have friends who are Buddhists, friends who just practice meditation. I happen to be Methodist, whatever works for you. And no one should tell you. And because when you get knocked down, and you have to find that inner strength to get back up there and get back in the ring.
I like that.
And so what my mother taught me, and there were many, many times I thought my career was over or that I didn't have the skill set to do the jobs I was given. And it was falling back on that spiritual support system, as well as what my father told me, saying, okay, I got a gap in my knowledge here. How do I fill that so that I can do my job?
No, that's incredible. And it kind of brings me to the next question I have about so a few years ago, you wrote a book called A Woman's War.
Right.
Um, tell us more about the title, what inspired you to write the book, but also what does the title symbolize for you? And I understand the connection you made with your mother being a strong spiritual support system to you. Let's talk about you being the first Black female in your position. Let's talk about what the book means to you and to what it should demonstrate to other women or other people of color.
Yeah, actually, I think the book is universal for anyone thinking of a
Hmm.
career in intelligence. Uh, the reason I wrote it was because I got angry about the criticism of the intelligence community after 9/11. I wasn't angry that people criticized it. I was
Hmm.
angry that most people didn't know what they were talking about. When they said the intelligence community doesn't share, it made it seem like we never talk to each other. When actually, a good part of the problem is the huge amount of information. For the intelligence community, it's always difficult since so much is classified. Well, how much information are you talking about? So I have a couple of figures. One from 2007, the director of national intelligence did an article in Foreign Affairs. And he said every 24 hours, and this is 2007, the intelligence community screened 1 billion pieces of information. A
Hmm.
year later, I went to a conference in Chicago sponsored by the intelligence community, and a senior NSA official said out of all the information they get, human hands and eyes only actually look at 1/10 million. And the reason
Oh
they
wow.
were having that conference was they were looking for industry help and academic help in solving how hardware, software solutions to that. So a big part of the problem was one of the things that naval intelligence officers of my generation did. We call it all source analysis. We looked at information from all sources and put it together like pieces of a puzzle. In order to do that, one of the things you do is coordinate with other intelligence agencies. So you pick up the phone and you call NSA. Hey, do you have anything? I've seen this. Have you seen it? Do you have anything in your area that maybe supports that? Or what do you think? You call up the Defense Intelligence Agency. You call up one quick example. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union kept 2 submarines, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines off our west coast, 2 off our east. One day they went all of a sudden to 5. And so everybody's running around going, what's going on? Oh my goodness. Is the Cold War going hot? Well, I hate to give the Air Force credit for anything, but the Air Force figured it out. They said that the Soviets were doing routine maintenance on their land-based ballistic missile submarines. So in order to keep the same number of targets in the United States, where they could strike them, they increased their number of deployed ballistic missile submarines until the maintenance was done. And that's an example. So, what we learned is pick up the phone, talk to everybody. And so, but not all of the intelligence community agreed with that. And not everybody, each of the service intelligence agencies specialized. And for the Navy, that was ours. And the interesting part about that, after 9/11, if you go back and look at military intelligence, who were in the senior jobs, the majority were the naval intelligence admirals, primarily because of that background. Not to say, the other people, the Air Force targeting, when I was in, incredible. The Army, if you had to go over and do an operations in a part of the world that you knew nothing about, they were incredible with getting all the information and presenting it. So each of the services, so seeing that, I decided to write a book, giving the public an insight into what the role of a military intelligence officer was. And that's, at the time I was in, about 85% of the intelligence community resides within the Department of Defense. And I did it to educate the public and to encourage young people for the profession. As opposed to the title, the publisher came up with that. I wanted War on Any Given Day, because as an intelligence professional, you can come into work on any day and a crisis or war can erupt. So that's what I wanted. The publisher thought, and I had to think about it, was that I had to fight on 2 fronts. Since I was the first woman and or African-American for most of my jobs in the Navy, I had to fight the perception that I didn't have what it took, and I was just an equal opportunity statement. So I had that, as well as the routine crises and wars of any intelligence professional.
That brings me, that's a good kind of segue into the next question about there being so many firsts. I think it's a moment to celebrate, the number of firsts in the Biden administration, whether that be, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin being the first African-American Secretary of Defense. We have Avril Haines as making history for being the first woman to lead the U.S. intelligence community. Kamala Harris as making history for being the first woman and the first woman of color elected as Vice President of the United States. She has a saying. Her mother has a saying that you may be the first to do many things, but make sure you're not the last. Your career highlights included a number of firsts. In 1973, you were the first African-American female intelligence officer in a Navy squadron. In 1979, you became the first female and African-American instructor at the Armed Forces Air Intelligence Training Center. In 1989, you became the first female and African-American to lead the Intelligence Department's Fleet Air Reconnaissance Squadron in Rota, Spain, the largest Navy aviation squadron. So many firsts. This is a big question, but what does being first mean to you? And what does making sure you're not the last mean to you as well?
Well, my mom always told me, show them what you can do. So my thing was, in being the first, was to, like Kamala Harris's mother, don't be the last. And my saying that I like is, I'm honored that my ceiling became the next generation's floor. So when the Navy chose me to be the first in the aviation squadron, I'm smiling because I'm the one that suggested it to them. And when I first joined the Navy, the intelligence career field was not open to women. And the recruiter said, the new Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Zumwalt, was opening up a lot of career fields to women and minorities. When I first joined the Navy in the early 70s, there were race riots on aircraft carriers and whatnot, because for the most part, African-American men were confined to servant type jobs. For the most part, there were some exception, but that was the issue, or, labor. And the women, the nurses, I think, were the largest officer corps. And the only officer career fields open to women were administrative. And Admiral Zumwalt, and there wasn't even a woman admiral. And the first woman admiral he made was a woman nurse. And so he said, I know we're not perfect, but why don't you join us and be part of the solution and help us fix this? So he doesn't get a lot of credit for opening up the Navy to women and minorities. And so when I got into training, one slot opened to naval intelligence. They finally opened up, and I got it because of I had like over a year of international studies, and I had a pretty illustrious undergraduate career. Junior year abroad, studying in England with professors and members of parliament. Spring semester, studying European economic community under a Nobel Prize winning economist and whatnot. So I had that. And, when I did graduate school, my academic advisor was Dr. Joseph Corbell, Madeleine Albright's father. So that gave me the leeway. And so I got into school, and I tell this story. The first day of class, they gave us a Navy lieutenant who was our class advisor, like the guidance counselor. So he was going around asking the guys, typically for a naval intelligence officer of my generation, the first assignment was to an aviation squadron. So he kept ignoring me. I said, do you want to go to a fighter squadron or a bomber squadron? So I raised my hand. I said, well, what about me? What about me? Why can't I, why are you ignoring me? He says, I don't think you belong in the Navy, let alone in an aviation squadron. So I looked at him, and I tell everybody I was channeling Whoopi Goldberg, but she was still Karen Johnson. And I said, you can say whatever you want, but everybody knows that Black people are superior sexually. And the guys in the class nearly fell out.
Wait, how did that land?
They said, that's not true. It's Italians. I'll take you out tonight and prove it. Somebody said, no, it's the Frenchman. I'll take you out tonight and prove it. And from that, and I made it my point whenever the subject came up to say I wanted to go to the squadron. I also did my homework. Again, I got to give credit to the Air Force. Oh my God, what are you doing to me, Ty? But my roommate was Air Force, and the Air Force was sending women to aviation squadrons serving in combat in Vietnam. And so I did the research, and the law didn't say a woman couldn't go to an aviation squadron. It only said a Navy woman couldn't serve aboard a combatant ship, since most of the aviation squadrons deployed on the aircraft carriers that let it out. But so I went to class the next day. I said, why can't I go to one of the Navy's land-based aviation squadrons? When they deploy to a war zone or an operational deployment, they go from one land base to another land base. Therefore, the law doesn't apply. And I said it just like that. I didn't take off my bra, like women at the time were doing, and burn my bra and get a sign and march outside their office. I just worked really hard in the class. And they decided to make me the test case. And they said the reason I was obviously good, I'd be good at it because I'd done so well in school. And the second reason was my sense of humor. They thought that would help me fit into an all-male culture. And, I could go on with what was probably the hardest 3 years of my life. But, the resistance, guys would refuse to salute you. And I remember at one point, a young enlisted guy came up to me and started screaming and yelling at me. He said, you don't belong here. You're taking a job from a man. Why don't you go away? And I looked at him and I said, you know, you're absolutely right, but I come from a poor family and nobody wanted to marry me. And that
Wow.
got around base, you know, and so that won over that, plus being really making a point to do really, really good. And I know we're
Yeah.
going to talk about mentors, but at my lowest point, you know, I didn't think I was going to make it. You know, they really weren't treating me very well. You know, the details are in my book if you want to know it. So I was in my office crying, and I heard a knock on the door. So I wiped my tears away, and I opened the door, and there stood a grizzled Navy chief. And he looked at me and he said, "Ma'am, we chiefs just want to let you know that we think you're the best junior officer in the squadron."
And what do you think led him to walk up to your door that day and tell you that?
Because they didn't like the way I was being treated. And the
Okay.
squadron I was in, typically when you came in as an ensign, you know, it's like a second lieutenant in other services, the mission was so complex that you spent your first year as an assistant learning under an aviator. And then your second year, you were promoted up to be the intelligence officer. At that moment, the senior leadership in the squadron felt that I didn't have what it took.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what it was an intelligence officer did, but whatever it was, I wasn't qualified.
Huh.
In spite of what I had done and the kudos I had been receiving from the flight crews. So I think the chiefs saw an injustice and took it upon themselves to say that to me. And that's the best compliment I've been given in my life, because in the Navy's run by the chiefs and the admirals. And if the chief said it, then I thought it must be so. And that gave me the strength to stop crying and go out there and keep going. And I did. And out of that assignment, based on observed performance, I was hand selected for my next job, which was only given to the cream of the crop, young intelligence officers. So if I had given up and just quit, but the chiefs, they saw the injustice and they said, we're going to fix this.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. And it's a really moving story in terms of having someone, you know, at a superior rank, you know, kind of be aware of and recognize that injustices were being done. So let's actually talk a little bit more about, you know, how you define leadership. I think that, you know, the way that the chief kind of demonstrated leadership in that moment is a fine example. But I want to kind of hear how you define leadership. I'd also be interested in hearing how you define resilience, because you know, as you wiped the tears away and kind of got back to business, that there is some sort of resilient element in that story as well. Let's just go with those two first, and let me just hear how what your perspective on those two terms
Sure.
are.
Leadership, you know, there's a saying, I would keep a couple of sayings on my desk. And one of them was, a good leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they should go. And one of the things that I really liked about the way the naval intelligence community at the time groomed and educated the young intelligence officers was that you were given increasing responsibility, and you started out at the lowest level. And the thing about that is that by coming up that way, you could pretty much do any job. When you got to the point in your career where you were managing large numbers of people, you could sit down and do any job. In fact, you had done that job. And that gave you the confidence, you know, to know, you know, when you said, okay, we need to have this done, it needs to be done in this time period. People say, oh, no, I can't do it. Yes, it can. Yes, you can. Yeah. And let me show you, if you run into problems, here's how you can do that. Come to me and I'll show you how to get this done in the time period that we need. So that's kind of overall leadership. But you also, as a leader, you have to be able to be flexible and fluid. That as things change, you know, you got to be able to make fast pivots, particularly in terms of things like intelligence. Like the warfighters say the first day of a war or crisis, the operational war plan is out of date. The first day of a crisis, and even a crisis even before it gets to a war, the intelligence architecture is out of date. And that's how do you get information to the people who need it in the time and format that they need it in. The circuits get overwhelmed and the information, how you're gonna, and so you need to be able to pivot and train your organization so they can pivot. The other thing you have to do is you need, as a leader, to make sure you have diversity. And I define diversity different than most people. I'm thinking in terms, I include intellectual diversity. You need people who can think outside the box. For instance, to my knowledge, the first people, you have the target folders, here's a target, and you're looking to make sure there aren't any schools, hospitals, architecture stuff around that you don't want to destroy. And it used to be that you did all that manually. And the first people who came up with a way to do it with the computers were a couple of young teenagers that worked for me when I was in Nebraska, working for U.S. Strategic Command. Young teenagers, and their boss, I like to think I fostered an environment. They could come up to me, ma'am, I got these young guys that came up with a quicker way of doing this. So you gotta, don't write people off because they're much younger than you are. They might have tattoos and piercings and multicolored hair. You can't see their heart, you can't see their brain. So you gotta have that. And the same thing when you're looking at somebody older. Somebody, your boss, they might have tried something that you might want to do in that way. They may have tried it and that doesn't work. So if they don't want to go in a direction, ask them. Say, why aren't you considering that? Help me as an educational as to why this won't work. So that's all leadership, office chemistry. If you get somebody who's a backstabber, you got to be able to recognize it, because that's when I go around giving talks, that's the biggest complaint that I hear. How do you deal with the office bullies? So that's leadership. Resilience, I prefer to call it persistence. And that is to never, ever give up. There is always, when you're talking the workplace, there's always a solution. And how you can do that, you study how people who came before you handled similar situations. If you want to study how we do modern intelligence, you can go back to World War I, and you look at Elizabeth Friedman, she and her husband William, responsible for a lot of stuff in the NSA in terms of work methodology. The naval intelligence, how we operate, the all source intelligence. You go back to how the British and the US Navy handled the submarine campaign in the Battle of the Atlantic, the longest and I believe the costliest campaign during World War II. How did they do this? How did they figure out a solution to this problem? And you incorporate and update it. And then you have to look, and I'd look at any examples. One example, Roger Bannister, who broke the 4-minute mile. Scientists said it wasn't possible that the human body would just break apart. And he did it. And after he did it, I think it's up to like 1,500 people have broken the 4-minute mile. So just because something has never been done, or just because you might fail at something, Thomas Edison, I think it took over 1,000 tries to get a successful light. So you just bombard yourself with all of these examples of people who have achieved stuff that everybody said that was impossible. There's always a solution. You got to get people on the same sheet of music, focus on the solution and not the problem. And, don't give up. Persistence, and it goes in all areas of your life. Persist, keep getting back up and dusting yourself off.
No, that's a great kind of thing to keep in the back of your mind, I think, or in the front of your mind, because I think there are so many obstacles that folks face, no matter what industry they work in, and things like that. But I think the other question I wanted to kind of pose to you is, in the national security apparatus, we talked about, the diversity of thought or perspectives or intellectual diversity, right? What do you think is necessary to uplift what we're calling BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, communities of color, their voices in the national security and intelligence community. What do you think we need to be doing now in today's environment to bring those voices and those folks to the table?
I think that we should do more of what some people are doing. I know that NSA has a program with historically Black colleges, like helping to shape their curriculum and things like that, as does a bigger intelligence community, centers of excellence, more with that. And I would do, if they're not doing it already, is I would partner with some of these schools and give them national security projects to work on, to solve. Fort Lewis College here in my new hometown of Durango, Colorado, 1/3 of the population is Native American. And for instance, and just go to them, and give them the information that they need in order to work these solutions. Because what I see, what I've seen since I've gotten out, is that there is the same, if you take a look at the British government, they have like a shadow government when one party's out of power. They have people shadowing the same position, so that when their party comes back, they can do the job. We have some of that thing going on in the US. I know that the Biden administration is trying to put in people who haven't been in these positions, and we need more of that. And I think one way you can do that is forming relationships with colleges and universities that have strong national security related programs, as well as computer programs, because cyber, I do believe we are in an undeclared cyber war and have been for some time. So I think if you do that, if you keep cycling the same old people, and not everybody has the skill set that they say on their resume. You'll see some people being the talking heads on TV, and they don't really have the background. I know when I was in intelligence, we always said that the expert was the little old lady in the basement wearing tennis shoes. So whenever I had a crisis, whether, that I had to work for intelligence, whether it was Iraq, cyber, whatever it was, China, Russia, I always look for that little old lady with the tennis shoes, because it might not be the person who has the official title. They might just do all the figurehead stuff, go to the meetings, go to the conferences, and their people give them talking points to talk about, and so we need to start elevating some of those people. And a lot of them might not look like us. They've done a lot of studies that people who are considered more attractive are more likely to be hired than people who aren't. And so there are these biases, and everybody has them, that prevent people from looking beyond the people that they know. So I think forming these relationships with the colleges and universities, and and even some of the high school, maybe getting involved in some of their training, and letting the young people know. I know that the military is giving some really interesting signing bonuses for career fields like cyber. But whenever I mention to any of the young people in my family or friends, I said, well, if you could, if they don't know what they want to do, I said, well, why don't you look into the military? And I said, cyber, I heard, they're giving thousands of dollars signing bonus. They always go, ah! I look at them, I said, hey, I'm an old woman. Are you going to tell me that you can't outrun me or out push up me?
Yeah.
So it's a few ways to let young people know, and to develop programs where you catch them early in their educational career and they're open to a government career.
Yeah. No, so you made a pretty funny remark about the old lady in the corner with the tennis shoes. I'm wondering if there is an old woman in the corner with wearing her tennis shoes that inspired you along your career or in your personal life, that you would call a shiro, if you will. Obviously, this is Black History Month. So I'm curious to know if there is a woman of color or a Black woman in history who inspired you, who still inspires you today.
Well, I think there are many. One of my favorite was a young woman. She and I shared the same birthday. I think she's about 10 years older than I am. And she was born like the 22nd child, prematurely, had polio, uh, rheumatic fever. They said she'd never walk again. Then at the age of 13, she was in crutches, and then she went to braces. And then the high school track coach came to her father and said he wanted her sister on his track team. And the father said, well, you have to take her too. So he didn't want you because she could barely walk. He's thinking, how she going to run track? So she went to the Olympics at 16 and won 1 bronze medal. And then 4 years later, I think Wilma Rudolph became the first woman to win 3 gold medals. And to me, that story of persistence, of being told she would never walk. And there's a famous story, that her mother would take her, hundreds of miles each, a couple of times a week to get special treatment. And her mother was very spiritual, and they prayed on it. And she went in the church one day and was able to throw the braces off and walk without them, even though she had a limp, at least initially. So that's one woman. I already mentioned my mother. When growing up, watching women like Lena Horne conduct herself with such dignity and whatnot. Oprah. Oprah didn't, I talk about they judge people for how they look. I like the fact that when Oprah gained her greatest fame, she didn't fit the physical standards. She wasn't considered conventionally attractive because she had the weight issue. And to be able to, and people were making fun of her. I remember some of the scandal magazines were doing articles about people sitting next to her in a restaurant. She ate the whole chicken and even ordered dessert. It probably lies, but she shook off all of that and is now a billionaire. And so, just incredible. I only actually worked for one woman when I was in the military, General T.U. Kara. Again, I got to give credit to the Air Force. What can I say? She was an Air Force general, and she was very inspiring. And she prided herself on knocking away some of my rough edges.
Yeah, I would say the same about another woman by the name of Gail, who was Oprah Winfrey's best friend, best supporter, best cheerleader. And that comes in the form of being again, someone's cheerleader and champion. And I'm curious to know about, you talked about building up an early pipeline for communities of color to kind of get into the profession of national security and intelligence. I want to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on being a mentor in this space, and really championing younger generations to do the good work that we're required to do.
Yeah, I've done a ton of motivational talks, and I always say, and people take me up on it, I say, feel free to contact me. And sometimes it's the parents or family members who first contact me and say their child's considering a career in intelligence. When I was on active duty, I would mentor anybody who asked me. I remember I was being interviewed by a well-known Black magazine, women's magazine, and the lady said, "What's the majority of people you mentor?" I said, "Oh, young white males." And I said, "Look at the composition of the Navy. Why would I turn down people who come to me?" One quick story, because I know we're running long on time. I was not in the military as an officer. You come up for a promotion at certain points in your career, and if you don't get it, you get one more choice, which you rarely make it if you don't make the first time, and you have to get out. So I didn't make commander the first time, and I was expected to. Now, they even had my next job booked out. So, I was upset, depressed, and whatnot, but, the persistence thing, my parents pumped me up, and I wrote a letter, a one-page letter that I believe was divinely inspired about why I thought I deserved to be promoted. The challenge is when you get to as you get more senior, you're competing against, so everybody walks on water. So it is very difficult, if humiliating. So, I thought, well, okay, if I write and tell them why I think so, then I'll do it. And it's 4 sections: why I'm writing the letter, what I think could be potentially negative, and explaining if there's a reason for that. And the last part, and I tell everybody, has to be from your heart. It has to make you cry. It has to be genuine. And so shortly before I retired, I wrote the letter, and I did get promoted to commander, and of course made captain. And so years later, I'm almost out of the military. A friend of mine calls me up and it says, Gail, she's droning on and on about a young man who worked for her who didn't get promoted and was all upset and blah, 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 he's depressed. And so finally, after she gets him down and he stops crying, she says, have you ever thought about writing a letter to the board? He says, oh, funny you should say that. My boss gave me one. He was passed over, and this is the letter that he wrote. It was my letter that I wrote to the board.
Wow.
Still
That's
being
incredible.
circulated after all of those years. Because I did have people come to me and say, when they heard about what happened to me and I got promoted, and I kept the letter and I gave them a copy. And so I didn't know. And to my knowledge, everybody that followed that format got promoted.
That's fantastic. I think that, it brings up, I know we're running short on time, it brings up a question about, some folks are reluctant to be their own self-advocate. So I want to hear just a little bit about, obviously you were focused on, getting that promotion and really putting your heart into it. But I want to hear just a little bit of what led you to, come up with the idea to draft that letter. And then we can kind of shift and talk about some other fun, not more fun, but a little more, a little bit less, more personal things on your future.
Well, I believe it was divinely inspired because, and it's whatever your spiritual belief thing is. I believe in getting quiet and just kind of listening. And that idea popped into my head. And I did know that if you wrote a letter to the promotion board, they had to read it to the people making the decision. And again, knowing that the competition was so intense, the biggest challenge I had Graves' disease and got diagnosed in the late 70s, and that's an overactive thyroid. You lose weight. And in fact, when I first told my mom, when they finally found out what was wrong with me, I had a lot of horrible symptoms. And I told my mom I was losing weight, and she knew that. And so I told Mommy, they finally figured out what's wrong with me. I have a thyroid disease, and now they can fix it. And my mother said, can they hold off for a while? You could use some more weight loss. I said, Mommy, I'm dying of heart failure. They told me if they don't fix it, I'll die. And she said, well, just a few more weeks, So the problem was they removed 90% of my thyroid, but they didn't give me any thyroid supplement, substitute medicine, which is normal. So my weight just went out of control. And that was the biggest problem that I had. So I explained in the letter what my medical issue was. And, that seemed to be the biggest issue. Again, the appearance thing. And so that helped. And then, I said, but make strong. And so the other thing that I tell people, keep track of your achievements. Like one job that you might have had a few years ago, and maybe you were involved in installing a new computer system that became the model for stuff that was used, that became the standard. So keep track of your achievements. In most organizations, they have it when they give you your performance evaluations. Mm-hmm. They'll have a face-to-face session with you, and make sure you have that list. Or you could even say very tactfully, and I can tell you, how busy you are as a manager. So, hey, here's, my list of what I think I've accomplished during this reporting period, and just listing your accomplishments. So I think most of the time, maybe you might, 10% of the time somebody thinks you're being an egomaniac. But if you do it tactfully and realistically, Because if you're talking about a period of a year and you get several hundred people working for you, you're not going to be able to see what each person did. So if you provide that to them, that helps them fill it out. In fact, the Army, when I was in, that's how they do their performance report. You tell them what you'd like to achieve through their forms during this next reporting period. And then you tell them just before your boss gets ready to write your review, how you think you did. So I kind of just took that same format. And that helped. And like I said, I'm sure there's some people that might have thought I was an egomaniac, but I think the majority, oh, thank God. She gave me, I forgot that she did that. Oh yeah, that's worth mentioning. And because weight was an issue, I always made it a point if I did 5Ks, I came in, on the top 1/3 of, blip, 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 blip. So let's say, oh, she's fat, but she's in shape.
That's incredible. No, I think, there are, themes of both like authenticity and vulnerability in the way that you kind of expressed and demonstrated your history and your experiences. Thank you for both of those things and sharing with me. I'm curious to know what you're doing in retirement. I hear that beyond all the accolades of having been in the Navy, you're now studying music at Juilliard.
I
You
am.
are, I hear you're a DJ. So tell us more about that in the next few minutes that we have remaining.
Yeah, and it goes to show the skill set that I learned when I was in the military. When I moved to Durango, I'd done a DJ when I was in college, and I helped out, volunteered for the Armed Forces radio and television station in Spain. So I had some experience, and I saw the local radio station here was advertising for volunteer DJs. It was up at the Fort Lewis College. KDUR, one of two public radio stations here in town. So I went to the meeting and I almost walked out as soon as I walked in because I was 3 times older than anybody else in the room. I said, wow. So I said, buck up. I filled it out and they asked you what kind of music you could perform, that you could play. So I did. And at 8 o'clock that night, they call up excited. You can do R&B. We've been looking for an R&B disc jockey. So I did that for like 12 to 14 years. Not only did I do it, like I was one of the top, their favorite DJs on their station. Yeah. I had to, about 2 years ago, I decided I wanted to study music at Juilliard. They have an evening division program. Again, this is a motivational story. A lot of colleges, if you're over 65, will let you come in and take their courses for free. So including the one here in town. Well, I got in touch with a music instructor and he didn't bother to answer. I even talked to the program head, can I come or not? And she couldn't get him to say yes or no. And having grown up in New Jersey, I knew that Juilliard had an evening program that was easier to get into. I think in the day program, I think it's less than 1% of the people who apply get in. In the evening program, you still got to get interviewed. Like for my composition class, I had to submit 2 copies of work that I'd written in a half-hour interview. And I got in. It took 2 tries, but I got in the second try. And so now I'm writing music for the piano and violin. And today, when I get off, I got to write a piece for soprano and piano. I don't even, no offense to sopranos out there. I don't even like the soprano. I want to write out. And then I got to write a piece for the cello and something called a marimba. I don't even know what a marimba is. I think it's a xylophone. And all I tell you is write a piece for the piano and violin. And that's all I tell you. And then you go home and I spend hours. I don't play any instrument, but you can't see it. I've got 3 keyboards and I got a music notation software program. So it takes me hours, but I've been able to come up with stuff.
Yeah, that keeps you busy, keeps you creative, keeps you artistic.
My final words is never too late to be what you might have been.
Never too late. Isn't that a Luther Vandross song too?
Probably. Never too late.
Well, as we end this time, I want to thank you for, again, your candor, your leadership, and all of the amazing kind of motivational and inspirational kind of experiences you shared with us today. As we kind of end the call and our talk, I'm interested in hearing, because you're in this new space, and creativity and artistry is around you, what is your inspirational kind of go-to song that gets you pumped up, gets you amped up, gets you in the right headspace to take on, any of the influx of news or anything that's kind of bringing you down or kind of shaping your day? What gets you hyped up?
There's so many, but I think I Call You Faithful by Donnie McClurkin
Okay.
is a really good one. For physical fitness activities, the thing from Rocky, the thing from Terminator.
Okay.
This is G-rated, so I won't tell you the romantic stuff. I will tell you that one of my younger family members asked me to put together a tape for a CD for her for a special Valentine's dinner. So I said, do you want romantic or do you want sexy? And she told me sexy. And after she got it, she called up, she said, girl. I said, I may be 71, but I remember.
Still got it. I think that's the theme of today. Still got it. All right. Well, Captain Harris, thank you so much for everything today. In celebration of Black History Month, I'm so happy to have this opportunity to speak with such a profound leader in the intelligence community and in the military. Thank you for today. Thank you for everything that you're doing and that you continue to do. And look forward to kind of staying in touch if we can.
Please do. And like I said to people, I'm happy to talk with you. 28 years in the intelligence community, 3.5 in the defense industry. I did a lot of writing and a lot of blogs and whatnot. So any way I can help you, I can help you. And, I like giving back to everyone. And, if you're not a person of color, don't worry about it. I'm into intellectual diversity is what I said.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And on behalf of, the entire Truman community, thank you and happy Black History Month.
Happy to you and to everybody else. I'm so proud of you guys for things that a little bit jealous that I can't be out there with you still, but very, very proud of everything that you're accomplishing. That's been a light over the last few years, looking and seeing what Truman has been doing.
Yeah, amazing stuff. So that's pretty much it. That's all I have time for today. If I'm not sure how to end the call or like what we should be doing after this.
I think you just, for my Zoom calls, I just hit leave the meeting. Then I got to go back to